another episode of the Heart of Law podcast. My name is Mirena Umizaj, and today I have invited someone that has been a source of inspiration for me and many others in the legal field and the financial world. He's more than a lawyer. He has many areas of expertise, including an area that is near and dear to my heart: mindfulness and meditation. His name is Joe DiNardo. Joe has blended his mindfulness training and his professional career in a very skillful way that has enabled him to deal with much of the strain and turmoil of contingent fee world, as well as the loss of his young wife and the rigors of raising a 13-year-old daughter after the loss of her mom. Joe, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. It's been a tough year for many adjusting to a new normal. How did you and your family do with the global pandemic there in New York?
Well, first of all, my family did very well. My son, who is 30 years old, has his own house here in Buffalo. He's full time in school and also working full time in a job, and he seems to have been weathered the storm quite well. My daughter, who is now 20 years old, will be 21 in another week, has been in Orlando because she's enrolled at the University of Central Florida in a special program there. So she tells me that she doesn't live in Buffalo anymore, and she may visit from time to time, but she's in Orlando. So I think she's doing all right.
Well, I can't blame her. I'm in Orlando. Orlando's not so bad.
Yeah. And for me, it's interesting. This last year, we've been working completely remotely, as most people are.
Right.
And we've learned some things about how we can conduct business in a much less expensive way, cost-wise, because we don't need the 12 or 14,000 square feet we now have. We just don't need it because people can effectively work at home. And we as a group meet 2 or 3 times a week, underwriting meetings, face-to-face conferences all the time. And it doesn't seem to have in any way slowed us down. And in fact, in many regards, people are more productive, even though they're not working 40 hours in front of the computer screen.
Yeah.
But I've also had a benefit, a really big benefit, I think, that because I'm not leaving the house, I usually wake up early in the morning, like 4:30 in the morning, and sit for an hour or so. But now I find myself sitting for an hour or so in the early morning. I have time later in the day, 11 to noon maybe, I'll sit again. And I'm finding myself sitting, I'll go upstairs to my room at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night and sit again.
Yeah.
Then I try not to watch television
Yeah.
because I'm so chilled at that point. Or I might turn it on for a little while just for a bit of distraction or news or whatever.
Yeah.
So it has been a great benefit to me to have this kind of time to actually, deepen my own awareness and self-awareness, dealing with what all of us are dealing with in terms of this pandemic, the concerns, the fears, the change in our lifestyles and our inability to get together with and see our friends and family. I think all of that has led to, in America at least, a burnout in a sense. Like people are just, think about what we're doing.
I agree with that.
Okay, COVID is increasing, yet nobody wants to back off of this opening up process because people are just like at their wits' end on what to do. They want to get back to normal. And the chances are we may never do that.
Right. It's a new normal for sure. For sure. That's very interesting. So, what did you think about the way your governor there in New York handled the whole crisis? What are your thoughts about him?
Yeah, initially, first of all, he does not carry the charisma that his father and his TV brother had.
Brother. Yeah.
He just doesn't exude that kind of warmth, and I don't think people feel that way towards Cuomo. Having said that, though, I think he was a very good leader during the pandemic
Mhm.
for the most part. It's not
Mhm.
an impossible
Mhm. Mhm.
situation,
Right.
but I think he did a good job. He shut down the state, he shut down New York City. He changed us from being the hotbed of coronavirus in America, if not the world, to something else. He made a few stumbles recently. I guess apparently there's some question.
Sexual harassment claims.
There,
Yeah.
yeah, and also he's now been accused of this uh, these allegations about how he has treated and or what's the words I wanted to treated and or used his power with women in an inappropriate way.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
now I can't even tell you the number. How many do you know the number of women that have finally?
I
It's a
think a lot have come
yeah,
forward. Yeah, I haven't kept up with the number, but I know that he's being hit in all different directions and
yeah.
many women are coming forward. Yeah.
So when that happens, I think that spells the end of somebody's political career, at least for some period of time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, like you said, watching the news, which I feel like I kind of have to watch the news because I want to be that responsible, member of society and I need to keep up with what's going on. But I never leave feeling that this country's in good hands or that we're headed in the right direction. It's very depressing. So I try to minimize my time
Yeah.
exposed to the news too. Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about you, Joe, because you have lived quite an interesting life. And ever since we met, which is, I think it's been what, 7 or 8 years, I have been fascinated by you. I've been trying to understand how you work and how you think and what influences you. And it wasn't until we started having some of those discussions that I realized you're down a very interesting path, a path that I've also taken, but I'm sort of in the early stages. So talking to you is really deepens me and where I'm at in life. And I'm hoping that it helps other people, right, that are on that same journey. But you were a trial lawyer for 25 years. You were securing multi-million-dollar verdicts and settlements all over the Northeast. Why did you become a lawyer in the first place?
Well, I come from what anybody would consider to be very humble beginnings. I had an alcoholic father who couldn't hang on to a job that long, and we had 4 kids. And when I when I passed by the house that we lived in, which is 1,100 square feet now, I go by them and say, "How we do ever do that?" We had one bathroom for all 6 people in the house. It was just, anyways. So I was fortunate enough to get into college. A girl I was dating as a senior, when she learned I was planning on going to work at Kodak Park instead of college, because I couldn't envision myself going to college and I didn't have any money to do it.
Mhm.
She jumped in and had the school librarian get an interview for me at Brockport State College, and I went there and they gave me some assistance. I learned how to borrow money, student loans,
Yeah.
and I went to college. And then after the first year of, actually the first semester, we were in dormitories, and I was buddies with all of the guys, and every Friday and Saturday night we were out drinking and carousing.
Yeah.
And, at the end of the beginning of the second semester, we had a dorm meeting, probably about 60, 70 students and a
Mhm.
couple of dorm masters, whatever they call them. And the guy said, "How many of you made the dean's list?" You know, maybe 7 or 8 people raised their hand, but one of the guys that raised their hand was a guy that I was close friends with, big, tall, 6'6" maybe, and we used to call him the Legend. That's was his nickname. He
Yeah.
raises his hand. And I look across the room and I could see that everybody in the room, including myself, sort of respected that anybody was made the dean's list. It's hard in college.
Mhm.
There's the legend raising his hand. I was so inspired. I said, if he could do that, how did he do that? And then
Yeah.
I realized that every Friday night he didn't go out with us. Saturday, he was raring to go, crazy as all of us. But Fridays, he was absent. And I realized, he spent that extra time studying, and now he was still the legend, but he was also on the dean's list.
Yeah.
Well, that inspired me. And my second semester, I got a 4.0, and
Wow.
continued the next my sophomore year with 3.8s and 3.5s, and I just my after that inspired me. I became inspired by reading and learning and studying, and
Mhm.
it just fascinated me that my mind could actually do it. So I transferred from Brockport to the University of Buffalo for my junior and senior year,
Mhm.
and um, then it just I applied for law school, as did many people in that I knew in school. And somehow I got accepted into law school before Thanksgiving.
Mm.
And then when we were talking, I didn't know that I was the only one who did that, but as we were talking, I realized no one had even heard back from law school. I'm like, geez, this is a fake letter or something. Anyways, I was in law school, and again, I went to law school and was just amazed at, you know, my desire to study and learn everything except tax law.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
where I drew the line. I couldn't do it. I didn't understand it, but I got through it.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the end of my freshman year of law school, I was like eighth in my class, and
Wow.
well, that's what I said. I said, really? I couldn't believe it myself.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I didn't have a reason to go to law school other than economically, it was a way out and a way
Mm.
up.
To improve your lifestyle and your future. Interesting. So, did you once you started practicing, did you like it? Was it what you thought it would be?
I never had a chance to think about it because I'm not sure I ever allowed myself to think what I could be and what I would do.
Hmm.
So when we first started, I went to work with one of my law students, classmates, and his father was a lawyer. So I just
Right.
and clerked for them.
Hmm.
And I had been throughout law school. I taught part-time adult education on the east side of Buffalo, which is a predominantly lower economic and African American part of the city. But I taught there as a student teacher. I would teach adult education, the GED exams that they get when you can't go to high school, but you can take this exam. And I love the people. I had people who would pass out on the table while I was teaching, from drinking or whatever. But I just love the community, the feeling of it was like a big crazy family.
Right. Right.
And so when I was a senior last semester, I said, I'm going to be a lawyer next year. And, if any of you have need for a will, a divorce, an injury, your kids go get arrested, whatever it might be, please call me.
Hmm.
I gave them the phone number that they could use. And that's how I started getting my own clients,
Hmm.
just from that,
Grassroots.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that worked out well for me in terms of honing trial skills because I did a lot of small and then major criminal defense work that
Mhm.
I might not otherwise have come across, except that I had a connection into the community where many of those people got arrested. And by the way, in those days, they were clearly getting arrested for false reasons. Oftentimes, it was really, but it wasn't. The news wasn't into portraying the reality of their situation. Oftentimes,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I felt I started to feel better and better about representing people. And then, of course, that morphed into injury work because I also got some phone calls like, my son broke his foot here, or so and so had a car accident, and could,
Mhm.
and I realized that there was more to be made in that field. Uh,
Right. Right.
and we
So,
began to focus.
so you did the personal injury for a while, and then at some point you got into asbestos, right? In a really big way.
Okay.
And how, why?
So
What?
I started practicing in 74.
Mhm.
And throughout the 70s and the early 80s, my partner and I became very involved in trade unions as sources of personal injury work, both in the rail industry and in the construction industry throughout New York State.
Right.
So we were friendly with many, many, many union officials in several different states.
Mhm.
I got a phone call one day in 86, and within a couple of hours, Perry Whites and Arthur Luxembourg showed up at my office in Buffalo. A whirlwind of like, oh, this asbestos and that asbestos, and no one, we could not appreciate, nor did they really understand themselves what we were about to uncover.
Right.
But following their suggestions of going to the union offices to see if they could search their records for their membership that had died from mesothelioma, lung cancer, and so on.
Mhm.
I ended up bringing Whites and Luxembourg their first portfolio of cases, 1,200 cases. And they were like, whoa, Joe, this is great. So we forged then a friendship,
Mhm.
co-counsel arrangement that has gone on for the last 35, 40 years.
Decades. Wow. That's incredible. So you went from trying personal injury, criminal cases to then getting into this asbestos world. And then you made another change, another sort of shift, and that was into the financial world. So tell me that story. Why and how did you create Counsel Financial?
So very quickly, going back to 1992,
Mhm.
our law firm realized that so many clients were calling for financial assistance, and like many law firms, we were just doing it ourselves. It became, after a while, it became an impossible burden as our client list grew.
Right.
We couldn't afford to do that, and it was crazy. Anyways, it's not appropriate for law firms to be lending money personally to their clients. They're already doing enough for their clients.
Right.
So we asked a friend of ours who was a mortgage broker if he'd be interested in setting up a company. He did, called it Plaintiff Support Services. And that was, he just did it for our firm. And after a year of it, we said, you should do it, make it a business. And so he tried to do it for more firms in Buffalo and on and on.
Mhm.
So that was an ongoing business that I was familiar with. And I helped them in underwriting individual cases when they weren't black and white. In other words, when there was a liability question or a causal relationship. Then in 2000, Perry, Whites, Arthur, Luxembourg, myself, and a woman attorney, Felice Callahan, were just talking about plaintiff support. And then I said to them, guys, I get phone calls from lawyers all the time that say, hey, if you can do this for these plaintiffs, can you help me out? And we realized very quickly, as everybody knew instinctively, there was no such thing as loans to contingent fee law firms
Offers. Mhm.
using their their pool of cases
Mhm.
as collateral for the loan. In other words,
Mhm.
when you get a loan, you use your house and the equity in there, that's collateral. A building is collateral. If you have a factory full of widgets, that's collateral. But just a second. But you can't use contingent fees. And if
Yeah.
you use the word
You
contingent,
can't use cases as collateral, right? Up until that point, right?
so we thought, wow, now that we have some taste of this plaintiff support stuff, why don't we try to put together a loan to lawyers that looks just like a bank loan in form, but where they take equity in homes and buildings and other things as collateral. We'll substitute contingent fees that we've underwritten. and here's our underwriting guidelines. We knew that the bank were going to say, look, it sounds like a great idea, but show us what you're actually doing and so on. So we did all of that. And that was the beginning of Counsel Financial. And at that time,
86.
pardon?
This is in 1986.
No, this is in 2000.
Oh, this is in 2000. Okay. That
So
makes sense.
we didn't have that much money to do it. So Perry, Arthur, and I put in, I think initially put in between the three of us, like 10 or $15 million. I forget. And that Citibank, who thought we were right out of our minds to do this, said, if you want to sign for it, we'll give you guys another $10 million. So we had 25 million to start with.
Wow.
No clients, and no one had ever really done it before.
Right.
So we started to let people know that we were willing to look at loan applications. Well, the demand was enormous because everybody was saying, wow, we can't get a loan to help us advertise or to help us, with our case costs and so on. This is great. So we went back to Citibank after we now had a loan portfolio of $25, $30 million. And said, here's what we've done with your money and our money too. We think we should get a line of credit of 25 million. And oh, by the way, we're not going to sign for it anymore. It's just a regular business loan. So they liked it.
Wow.
They saw, wow, you're really doing this. And while their lawyers didn't quite get the underwriting of contingent fees, they saw this makes sense to us. So Citibank did the first non-recourse line of credit to us in this industry. And then we went with Citibank throughout the early 2000s up to 2009. And we ultimately ended up with a line of credit of 200 million, but we were placed in their securitization division because our loans looked like bonds that were paying a premium or something.
Interesting.
So, yeah, we didn't understand exactly what that all meant, but it was good for us in the sense that we
Right. You just had access to the money.
Yeah.
So at one point, Counsel Financial was the only game in town. And a lot has changed since then because a lot of sources of capital and hedge funds are now doing the same thing. And, part of my business model is to deploy capital to law firms, and I do it through these different sources of capital. So how does Counsel Financial still compete now that the landscape has changed so much?
Good question. What I think Counsel Financial did, if we brought anything to this now fairly big industry, it was that we proved that you could in fact underwrite a portfolio of 100, 1,000, whatever cases they might have, underwrite it and understand what the liability concerns might be, what the causal relationships might be, and what the amount of damages that might be. And if you did that in a conservative or way, and also in a more in the way that we typical trial lawyers do it, you could come to a happy medium with the law firm and say, this is what we think your portfolio of 500 cases is worth. It's worth, you have $30 million of fees sitting there. It may be more, but we don't think it'll be less.
Right.
And we can lend you $4 million against that $30 million of fees. Okay, now with $4 million, you could really do something with the advertising and infrastructure and so on. So during the 2000s, hedge funds and other people began to realize not that they wanted to be like Counsel Financial, but that there's a way of underwriting this collateral. We'll figure out how we want to loan the money to the law firm.
Right.
But it can be done. You can underwrite this collateral pretty accurately too. Now, the one thing that nobody at first really captured and that we've all learned a lesson from is that nobody, including Counsel Financial, could underwrite the timing of the receipt of these fees.
Right.
It might be that their biggest fee suddenly ends up on appeal for an additional 18 months or longer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No one saw that coming. At least we didn't think about it. Okay.
Right.
And many other things could happen. For instance, where a defendant agrees to pay on a mass tort, and then they say, we're going to pay you guys almost what you're demanding. Everybody's happy. But then they say, but we can't pay you for a year. So now they have this piece of paper that says, you're going to get paid, but
Right.
not for 12 more months.
Right.
Well, you take that to a bank and you can't do a thing with it at a bank. So hedge funds who were looking at this said, wow, this is a different aspect of it, and this has less danger and risk,
Yeah.
than the regular loan, because this is settled. There's no question. It's about timing.
Right.
And that became a whole industry, as you know, post-settlement. So there's now a lot of competition, but there's no direct competition to our loan model, where you get a line of credit to a law firm. It's revolving. They pay interest only during the first 2 years. And that's a model that has worked for us. There are, as you know, many other ways that that these big funds advance, lend, whatever to law firms, but they're costly. They're more costly than counsel. But in counsel, the law firms are signing personally too. And so the way the hedge funds try to make themselves more attractive is they say, well, we won't make you sign personally.
Right.
But everything else in their loan document is like puts a big clamp, down, and they're going to get their money back.
Yeah.
So, anyways, it's become a much bigger industry by financial standards. We're still all pikers. I mean, given what big banks and hedge funds really are doing, but it's a growing industry and it's a growing collateral. People are becoming.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun with it. And I see what it can do for law firms, right? So it varies, the terms vary from, hedge fund to hedge fund, from capital source to capital source. Ultimately, it has done a lot of good in our industry. And law firms have grown in ways that they have never grown before. And this is new.
If they're smart, yeah.
Scaling in, going from a few hundred cases to thousands of cases. So it's been a really fun journey for me to be part of that movement. So after 20 years of being in the lending money to law firms business, what have you learned, or what is the takeaway that you're willing to share with the audience, good or bad?
There are a number of takeaways. The first I mentioned is that we and everyone needs to pay attention to timing issues. What could happen that would disrupt the flow of revenue to the law firm?
Yeah.
Not winning or losing. Maybe they're going to get more, but the timing of it. How and when are they going to pay the money back?
Yeah.
But the other takeaway, Mirena, that unfortunately I have learned by watching not only clients of counsels, but clients of law firms that do these other types of funding,
Right.
is that money problems make good people do bad things. So I believe, it's my experience, that trial lawyers, for the most part, are good people. They mean well. They're not in the game to take advantage of anybody. And if they're borrowing money, they're doing it in their minds for the right reasons and so on.
Right.
Things happen in the world. And suddenly they might be faced with the decision, I have access to this $1 million,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't paid the mortgage on my summer home, my winter,
Yeah.
whatever you call it. Uh, my wife wants to do this, my husband wants to do that, whatever it might be. These other expenses arise, college tuitions, which are crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly they say, what do I do? And so they take the $1 million line that they have, and
Mm-hmm.
they use some or all of it
Mm-hmm.
for these personal but non-productive reasons,
Mm-hmm.
thinking, well, I've got such and such a case coming and such a case coming, and I'll square it all away at some point. But they, like us, can't always know the timing of all of that. And guess what? Those cases don't come in on the time frame that they plan. And so good people, because of the pressure of economics and bills and just money issues,
And
good.
then keeping up the lifestyle and keeping up that, what they've established, right? The success
So
story.
yeah, so the corollary to good people
Mhm.
when money issues arise can do bad things.
Mhm.
Corollary is that as a lender, and if you are a borrower, you need to do use the money wisely.
Mhm.
So most lenders now don't just say, okay, we're going to advance you $3 million. They
Mhm.
say, you have available $3 million. Now tell us exactly what the use of funds is going to be. Because we
Yeah.
learned as a lender, we want to know what you're going to do with the money.
Mhm.
And so the lawyers lay it out. And then the lender says, okay, so each
Mhm.
time those things happen, call us for a draw and we'll send you 100,000, 500,000, whatever it might be. But it all has to be done. And lawyers initially rebel at that kind of control.
They
But
do. They do.
yeah, they do. But I hope that they've learned that this is not being done because it's being done because we know what money issues problems can do.
Mhm.
And it puts you in this position where you have to decide then how you're going to use the money. So we're trying to help.
Save them from themselves.
So I think wisdom on behalf of the borrower and supporting that wisdom on behalf of the lender is another takeaway that I have, that's come home to roost for us, and that we have appreciate much more. And we have, so it's an easier for us to say to a lawyer why we're doing this, because we really believe it, and we believe it will really make the loan work. Which
Mhm.
is what, remember, they have to remember the loan only works for us if we get paid back.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's our concern. Are you using the money to make more money in your
Yeah.
law firm?
So, Joe, business aside, you are a deeply spiritual man, and um, you started practicing mindfulness a very, very long time ago. You've been a Buddhist for 50 years
Mhm.
now. Can you tell that story? How did you find Buddhism?
Okay, well, of course, I was a late teenager in my early 20s, in the late 60s.
Right.
Everything that they say about the 60s is true.
I wish I was born in the
There,
60s.
there was that sense of experimenting with all sorts of things
Yeah.
those days
Did
that
you experiment with everything?
I did. I
Yeah.
did. And there was actually one experience I had um, that was, uh, it's just extraordinary.
Oh,
Okay.
what were you taking?
LSD.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and it was extraordinary. So
Tell me, describe the story because I'm very curious.
I came home from basic training. I felt like I could run through a wall. All right. That's what they do to you in basic training.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine gave me these two little pills, and he said, Joe, this is white lightning. He said, I'd never taken anything like that before. And he said, so just, when you take it with Marcia, who was my girlfriend at the time, not my wife. This is a different Marcia.
Oh, okay.
She is an expert. Okay. I said, okay. So we what they call dropped this acid. And so this is going back to, what year was this? This was probably 1970. Okay. And we were in a little apartment, little one-bedroom apartment, nice little place that we had. And for the first hour, like, nothing happened. So I said, well, maybe nothing's going to happen. Maybe this was just bogus stuff. And then I went into the bathroom, and she could hear me. I was brushing my teeth, and she said, Joe, don't look in the mirror. I remember her yelling. And I said, what? And I look up in the mirror and go, my face just went, whoa. And then the trip started in earnest. And there were moments when the ceiling of our room would just seem to just open up and become like the sky. And I mean, it was like things like that just happened moment after moment. And it carried with it the feeling that your consciousness was clearly expanding in some way during this. It wasn't a scary thing at all. It was all beautiful. And then I remembered that after about, this went on for like 24 hours. And so it was early morning, like maybe like 7 o'clock. And I said, oh, I feel great. I think we're down. She said, well, Joe, you should be here. I said, no, I feel all right. Let's go get something to eat or coffee at this little restaurant. We're walking along. I said, hey, Marcia, why is the snow glowing like that? It's like all glowing blue. She said, Joe, you're still tripping. Said, well, really? So it's not really glowing. So I don't know if it's really glowing or not really glowing. It's glowing for you, but I'm not. I said, okay, let me chill out. Into the restaurant, we go way in the back. No one's there. It's early in the morning. There's a couple of guys up in the front booth, but we go way in the back room. We get coffee. I don't even know if we ordered food. And all of a sudden, I could hear, like, if it would be like people were talking, sitting right next to me. I said, Marsh, who's talking like that? They're like, is someone in another room or something? She goes, what do you mean? I said, they're talking. I can hear them clearly, Isabel. Yeah. She said, I don't know. So I look around, and I'm hearing, at least I think I was, the guy sitting way up in the front of the restaurant, like as if my hearing had become so enhanced that I could hear that far. It was like an amazing, I'm like watching their lips move, and I'm hearing them as if they were talking like right next to me. So I said, oh, I got
it was supernatural.
It felt like that. So I said, I got to call my brother, okay, and who's in Rochester, living at my mom's house. And she said, oh, no, I don't think that's a good idea. I said, I'm okay. I just want to say thank you, and I love him, She said, I don't think you should do that, Joe. Okay, so there were payphones in these days. So I got a couple of quarters. And my brother's sleeping, so my mother answers the phone. She goes, hello? Marcia's standing next to me, and I go, Mom, oh no. I start crying. I love you so much, Mom. And she's like, I could hear her yelling, Emil, there's something wrong with Joey. Come down here. I said, oh, Mom, I wish I could hug you. And Emil said, Joe. I go, hey, he goes, you took that white lightning, right? I go, yeah. He goes, let me talk to Marcia. So Marcia,
how much did you
talk back
take?
and forth, and
did you take a large dosage, or did you have any?
The white lightning was like one of the most powerful LSDs. They had names to them, okay?
Yeah, okay.
And white lightning was more on the pure side and didn't have a lot of anything cut into it. It was just really powerful stuff, which is why when I got it, the person said, be sure you're with Marcia. Don't just do this by yourself.
Yeah.
And now I see why.
Yeah.
Uh, so after she was done, she said, "Here, your brother wants to talk to you." I go, "Hey, Mo." It's all right, Joe. Yeah, yeah, we love you. Mom's okay. Yeah, Joe, just do what Marcia says. Go back to the apartment. Okay? Okay, Mo.
That's great. That's
And
great.
the trip was very much like the Sergeant Pepper's album. A lot of those experiences where these little dancing men. I was crazy. But
Yeah.
anyway,
So did it expand you in a way that you
it
felt
did.
like that was
Yeah.
an opening for you to start looking at yourself differently and the consciousness differently?
It was there. I wouldn't have been able to verbalize it that way, but in fact, that's what the experience was. And even after I was done with it, a week later, I felt like a something had been opened up for me, and that I was felt softer about myself and more open to different possibilities. Because up until then, I had been so inspired about reading and learning and becoming a lawyer that I didn't pay a lot of attention to
Right.
my
Anything
softer
else?
side. Yeah.
Right. Mhm.
And then anyway, so Marcia and I then broke up at some point. We didn't have like a marriage type relationship. And we were very friendly, but we broke up. And I'm now a lawyer. Maybe I was 26 years old, 27, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Allentown, which is a little part of Buffalo. And below me is a meeting room. And every Friday night, these elderly people filed in, maybe 25, 30 of them, and all sweet and nice. If they saw me, they said, "Oh, how are you?" So after about a month of this, every Friday night, I was leaving to go out, and I just bumped into one of them. They said, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "Great." And I said, "Who are you guys?" He go, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I mean, you come here every Friday. What are you meeting about? What is it? What is it?" "Oh, well, we're the Theosophical Society. We believe in all religions,
Wow.
but primarily on the Eastern side, Buddhist side." I said, "Wow, that's very exciting and interesting. How long have you been doing this?" "I've been doing it forever." I said, "Okay." Uh, End of story. They go, "Hey, why don't you come to one of our meetings? There's not just one of our members gives a talk." I did. It was nice. They had donuts and cookies afterwards. Some of them were psychics. Okay. Yeah, they were an array of fringe people, but sweethearts, all of them, the men and the women both. And then after I'd gone to a couple of meetings, I said, "Hey, Joe, why don't you give a talk?" I said, "What would I talk about?" No, you can do it. You're the only one who's educated here. So I said, "Okay, I'll give a talk on Buddhism." And I went and just stumbled onto a book at Barnes and Noble or whatever bookstore I went to that was called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by a man named Suzuki Roshi. Little did I know that this was a seminal book bringing Zen and Eastern thought into the United States. I didn't even realize that. So the very first line of the book, I still remember it. I use it whenever I teach. Goes, "In the beginner's mind, there are many opportunities. In the experts, there are few." Of course, you think about that for a while, and you begin to see the meaning and what that could all mean just for yourself and just for everything. I said, "Wow,
Very profound.
yeah,
Very profound expression.
that's an interesting way to start the book." And I said, that's like the most powerful thing.
Yeah.
And he said that then he went on to say, "Have the beginner's mind, because the beginner's mind opens you up to all sorts of opportunities. But if you approach everything with the idea that you already know what it's supposed to be and the definition of it or whatever, you don't have so many opportunities and you're going to miss a lot of what's real." So I read the book, I gave a talk, and in the course of studying the Buddhism itself, as you know, the Buddha starts out with the Four Noble Truths. Um, and then the idea of mindfulness becomes a big part of his eightfold path, as he calls it. Mm-hmm. And it just struck me that idea of learning to focus our minds, to concentrate, and then using that concentration to explore what is happening to us, whether it's physically or mentally, emotionally or whatever, at the moment. And I know I mentioned this to you before. It reminded me in reading that of when I was much younger, like 8, 9 years old, and would have like a bad experience with my dad or my parents scolding me. I would run upstairs to cry in my room, a room I shared with 2 of my siblings, but my room at the moment.
Yeah.
And look out the window, and then I remember having the thought, if I could just concentrate, I wouldn't have all these feelings. I wouldn't be angry. I wouldn't be hurt. I wouldn't be mad, whatever. That's all. It never amounted anything in my life until I read about mindfulness and concentration. And it clicked with me. That's all. It clicked with me. So it gave me an interest in pursuing Buddhism. So I began to read about it, and I began to try to meditate by myself. No, there were no teachers that I was aware of. And then I read a book in '74, I think it was, a man whose name was Richard Albert. He had been Timothy Leary's partner at Harvard. They both got fired for taking LSD and so on. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Timothy Leary went to California and founded Esalen. Mm-hmm. But Richard Albert went to India and found a guru, Neem Karoli Baba, a very famous Indian guru. And he stayed there with him for months and months. And he was given the name Baba Ramdas, which I think is like means servant of God or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so when Ramdas comes back to New England in his home, he writes a book called Be Here Now. Mm-hmm. I read it. It was sort of quirky. It wasn't just like a book with pictures and stuff. And so I just wrote a letter back to him. Said, Ramdas, would you ever be interested in doing a retreat, meditation retreat in Buffalo? I figured that's the end of that. I'd never hear from him. But 2 weeks later, I got a letter. I would do it. When would you like me to come? I'm like, wow. Yeah.
That's
so in between, I did a retreat with him somewhere in New England. And then he came to Buffalo. We had a 4-day retreat. We had 200 people come to sit.
Wow.
We had to feed them, it was the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But so I never got to spend any time with Ramdas because I was busy, helping to organize everything. I had a lot of good help, but it was still a lot. So at the end of the retreat, Ramdas asked someone to ask me to come and see him. So I went over. He said, "Hey, Joe, I'm so sorry. We never got to spend any time together. You were busy. I was busy." Yeah. He said, "So tell me about your meditation practice." I explained to him what I'm doing on my own. I had no teacher, just reading about it. He said, "Well, how long are you sitting?" I said, "I can sit anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes, but that seems to be the wall for me. At 40 minutes, I just can't break that. And I don't know what I'm doing exactly. I mean, It's one thing to say, well, just follow your breath, but lots of stuff happens once you start doing that." Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well, friends of mine just opened up a meditation center in Barre, Massachusetts. And they all were years in India and Southeast Asia studying as monks and nuns and students. And they're gonna start teaching 3-month courses, 1-week courses, 2-week. And you should hear their names: Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg. Those are the names. They founded Insight Meditation Society."
Wow.
He said, "And Joe, can you make me a promise?" I said, "What?" He said, "I want you to sit for 1 week out of every month for the next 4 months. Can you promise to do me that? I think that will really break your meditation log jam for you. He says, it's not going to happen in one day sitting or one.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, I'll do that. So I went there right away within a few weeks and sat for my first course, not knowing I had a clue what
Right.
a meditation course was. Complete silence,
Mm-hmm.
the training of the mind to calm down, stay focused, be in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave wonderful Dharma talks every night. One of them would speak for about an hour. It was more inspirational than anything, but explaining a lot of what will unfold and does unfold usually. So that started my serious drop into mindfulness, concentration, meditation. And I don't use the word meditation too much, Mirena, because it just carries a lot of baggage. I mean, meditation. I mean, everybody thinks of like this handsome or beautiful person sitting in, on the ocean's cliff, meditating with a smile on their face. I mean, that's okay. And maybe that happens. But
Yeah.
mostly meditation has a lot of other aspects to it that don't look like that.
Interesting.
So I just began to learn a lot from them.
So I watched the Netflix documentary Dying to Know. Have you watched that?
No.
You should. I think it's a great, great documentary. It's with Ram Dass and Timothy Leary. And this is how I learned about them.
Yes, I did watch the documentary.
Okay, okay. Now, I was blown away because I didn't even know these men existed. And I had sort of started my journey, and I don't know how I stumbled upon the documentary, but I did. I watched it, and these two men were like very complex, controversial characters in this epic friendship that shaped an entire generation. And you were like right in the middle of it. So I feel indirectly close. And I knew that you knew Ram Dass. So when I watched it, I had that in the back of my mind. And Timothy Leary was a Harvard psychology major professor. And Richard Alpert, who when afterwards was Ram Dass, he began, the two of them began probing in the edges of consciousness and started experimenting with LSD and all of this. And I just thought, what a time to be alive, because this was sort of the beginning of this movement in the United States. Is that a fair statement? So, I mean, and then the movie, of course, this documentary addressed like questions about life and drugs and the biggest mystery of all, death. So how has you don't want to use the word, I use the word meditation because the teachers that I follow, Dr. Joe Dispenza and Abraham Hicks and Tony Robbins and some of these people that have become very, very spiritual. They call it meditation, they call it healing, they call it prayer. There's different ways. You call it sitting, which I didn't know that, I just go sit for an hour. But how did you become so in tune with your practice, and how did you use that in your life? Meaning, were there instances where you were tested and you put your practice to use?
So the foundations for really practicing mindfulness, first you have to have real motivation. In other words, people say all the time, whenever they hear that I've taught a course or that I do meditation, they'll say, oh, I need to meditate. I've come to learn that there are two kinds of people that say that. One that really wants to meditate, and so they do. And the other who wants to meditate. That's for a lot of reasons, even myself at some point. Most of us are in that category most of the time. We don't really want to do it. We want to do it.
Right.
Okay? So I've always been motivated when I see something that is meaning to me. So I had the motivational part of it.
Mhm.
Um, and so when I went to the first course and sat for a week, uh, it was a sort of an awakening for me. And like many people who talk about their courses after a while, there
Mhm.
was a moment in which so you're always, the sitting practice is obviously a big part of the practice, but it also is learning to be mindful in your walking, and your eating, and you're laying down your head to go to bed. And you're always trying to be just in the moment. This is very hard, much harder than when you're just sitting.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I remember walking down one of the corridors, lifting, moving, placing my foot, lifting, moving, placing my foot, and trying to just be in the experience of how does my mind get my body to do that in a balanced and effective way. I mean, think about what you do when you're walking. A million things are going on in your body, but somehow it all just works. You make the
Harmony.
intention, you want to walk down the hall. The next thing you know, your body is moving down the hall. But it can be helpful, just for practice purposes, to take some time and maybe take a look at exactly what's happening. So I thought, as I was approaching this door that I had to go through, I stopped and I just had this thought: I am going to be as mindful as I can be about everything that is going to get me from here
Mhm.
through that doorway.
Mhm.
I remember feeling, moving my hand toward the doorknob, touching, cold, slick, turning, pulling. And during that little process, I just had this feeling like, wow, there's so much here. And this is like a nothing thing that we do every day and never think about it.
Mhm.
So in my real life, in my regular life, maybe there's a balance between never thinking about it and just being in the moment, which you can't go through life like at
Right,
that pace, right?
right, right,
But
right.
so maybe there's a place in between there where I could just be more generally aware of myself, my body, as opposed to walking down the hall and thinking about who I'm going to see, what I'm going to say tomorrow, where I'm doing, and I'm never really letting my mind, get focused on just what's happening in the moment. There
Mhm.
are plenty of opportunities, and it can be very skillful to make plans, to think about the talk you're going to give tomorrow, to plan your closing arguments and or what you're going to do. I mean, you can't just wait and see what happens. You have to, if you're in business, you have to do these things. But there's a way of doing them
Mhm.
where you can be more mindful of what you're doing, and having that mindfulness, or attempting to have that mindfulness throughout the day will help you and support you when you decide to take that 15 or 30 minutes sit.
Right, right.
Okay.
Okay.
You sit, and now you're just going to follow the breath, which is much easier to do when you're sitting and
Yeah.
and watching what arises in the mind or in the body. So that's back. I turned out that I sat the very first course they ever had at International Insight Meditation Center, and I was, smitten with the whole idea. It just made sense to me,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I have since sat. I couldn't even count the number of courses, 1 week, 2 weeks, and so on, here all over the
Still
country.
do it, right?
Yeah, I still do it. Yeah. In fact, I'm hoping when I finish closing, selling my house, and making sure my daughter's situated, that I'm planning to go and sit for a month. Um,
Mm.
you know,
Wow.
yeah, that'll be exciting to me. I mean, I look for, now there were days when I would, in the early days of going to retreat, that when I said, okay, I'm going to go next week, there would be that sense of trepidation and like fear, like, can I do this? I did it once, but well, can I do it again? It's not easy, Joe. You now know it's not easy. But now, after 50 years of working at this, um, I don't carry so much of that trepidation when I decide to like sink into a retreat, knowing full well that I won't speak again for a month. I won't, you know, very. I don't usually eat so much on retreat, uh, and it takes.
Cleansing of the body and soul.
Yeah, it takes a lot of effort. I mean, it's not something. It sounds easy. It's
It's not.
simple. Right?
Yeah, I
So
mean, it's simple, yet it's very intricate.
what most teachers will tell you is that it sounds simple.
Mhm.
It's just hard to do.
So when I get to those points where I can achieve a state of complete clarity, and it doesn't happen every time I meditate or sit, but when it does, it feels so simple to me. I'm like, oh, I can do this again. And then when I try to do it again, it doesn't work. So it depends on the state. And it's such a,
So,
um, and yeah, go ahead.
so if you were a student telling me this,
Mhm.
what I would say to you is that it sounds like you might be falling in the same trap that all of us do. As an example, it's
Mhm.
easy to say, I was having this very dark experience,
Mhm.
but I've learned to let it go. But we also need to learn to let go of pleasant experiences. In other
Mhm.
words, those are the most difficult because now you sit the next day, the next morning, and you sit with the expectation
Mhm.
of,
Mhm.
and the expectation is what prevents you from getting to the place you were yesterday when, for whatever reason, you clicked in to that space. So that space is still there for you. The only obstacle now is your attachment to
Station.
your expectation. Okay. I remember what really helped me with this, really broke the hold that had on me once is I was sitting in a course out in Yucca Valley, and there were some very famous Buddhist monks there. One of the most high, Mahasi Sayadaw was one of the most highly regarded meditation masters on the planet. And my teacher to be, Munindraji, who I met there. And in the course of this 10 days out in the desert, the vibe was powerful.
Mhm.
And so about the third day, after the noon meal, I took a walk out into the desert by myself. And I sat down on a sand dune and suddenly began to think about the sun and the sand and the openness, and was having the most pleasant experience in this like enlightenment experience.
Mhm.
And I had an interview with one of the teachers at 2 o'clock. I couldn't wait to get back there. I couldn't walk back mindfully enough
Yeah.
to get there and tell them, look, I'm like, look what this I just did.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I go in the room. It's just me and the teacher. Jack Cornfield was his name, and he says, "How's your practice going?" I tell him this experience. I walked out in the desert. Everything opened up. He's listening. I must have gone on for 5 minutes.
Mhm.
I wanted him to say to me, "Wow, Joe, really getting it." So
Mhm.
he's so when I finished this beautiful explanation of
Opening statement.
yeah, designed to convince him. Oh,
Right.
that was. He looks at me and says, "Well, that's ridiculous." That's exactly how I responded. And I said, "You're right." He said, "Joe, let go. You can't hang on to it. I'm not saying it didn't happen, Joe, I'm just saying that so many of these things are our own mental constructs of what we think it should be. Just let it go. And whatever comes up next, and he said, the practice isn't those things. The practice is being able to watch those and every other thing from a place of equanimity. That's how your real life becomes more balanced, because you're practicing here. That's why so any meditator who's been doing it for a long time still calls what they do their practice. No one ever says, "Oh, I'm doing the end game." Okay, I've made it. Okay. But the people who understand say, this is my practice. I'm practicing letting go and seeing what arises next. If something will come up, I mean, something will come up. It could be very pleasant, but it might not be pleasant either. And we have to have that same equanimity for both, because it will allow those stronger, more pleasant experiences to arise versus you creating them by not having an expectation of what it'll look like or feel like or be like. That's what I would say to you if we were having this conversation.
Yeah, well, you just schooled me there. So I am going to a meditation retreat next week for a week.
All right, great.
And like I'm going to Dr. Joe Dispenza retreat. I'm not sure how familiar you are, but he's essentially a neuroscientist, and I got selected to be part of this research where they hook you up to these brain, scans, and they kind of measure your heart rate and your brain activity. So I'm really excited about that. But historically speaking, at his retreats, he'll speak, just like any other, teacher. He'll speak for a while and then you'll go into meditation. He does sitting, standing, and walking meditation because he wants you to be able to practice mindfulness anytime, like you were talking about. And, I'm still very much in the early stages of my practice, of my work, although I've been at this for 7 or 8 years. And I've always been drawn to this kind of information. And it allowed me to, work with my personal trauma and dilemmas and things of that nature. So I am always trying to break through something, and I'll sit there and have a wonderful experience, and then I hit a wall, and then I am afraid to try again because I feel like I've lost the ability to do it correctly. And so I have this pull and push and pull and push constantly. I've also experimented with some drugs, not because I wanted to party, but in the name of trying to see how it would aid my spiritual evolution. Nothing serious, but mushrooms and LSD and things of that nature. And I've realized I don't really have control of those experiences, and so they frighten me. And it's not something that I subscribe to anymore. But I've certainly experimented. So I guess the question becomes, have you continued your use of LSD or any psychedelics to aid you in the process of your practice, or did you kind of stop in the 70s and you became this rooted person?
I probably did back in the late 60s and early 70s, 5 or 6 acid trips. Most were good, some were not so good. But I agree with you. When you put a chemical of any kind in your body, you lose control of what's going to happen. You can't just say, okay, I think that's enough.
Yeah.
So I haven't continued the use of anything. I don't use any drugs. I don't smoke marijuana, or I don't do anything. And I would not recommend to people as a way of breaking through that they do it. If someone is drawn to that, or they feel that they're loose enough that they can have a good experience, great. But I would not recommend it as a way of doing it. The practice if you approach meditation, mindfulness with the right attitude and under the guidance of a good teacher,
Right.
you know, lots of different things will open up. But what you come to realize that in whatever enlightenment is, it's there already for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of us, like cleaning the mirror off.
Mm-hmm.
We do but it's a slow process. Now, there are some gifted human beings
Mm-hmm.
who can accelerate that process.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But the rest of us, like you and me, okay,
Yeah.
because we are so resistant to understanding that the practice is the enlightenment. There isn't like a place that we're going to get to.
There is no destination, right?
It's just being in the moment and being able to just watch as life arises and causes cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, without getting drawn into the drama of your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
That's when, for me at least, and for many, that those experiences of not enlightenment, but of that little increment of wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
is you begin to grow in that sense of wisdom. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, you mentioned about how difficult you are on yourself, as most people are judging. I'm not doing it right. I've lost it. That they can't get it back. In the mindfulness practice, one of the things that often goes overlooked is that you're following your breath or you're breathing, whatever, and suddenly you catch yourself running off with a thought about your mom, your friend, work, whatever.
Right.
And you catch yourself up thinking, you say, just thinking. You come back to the breath. But when you catch yourself, there needs to be a moment of non-judgment.
Mm-hmm.
You have to say, don't criticize yourself. Don't chastise yourself. This is part of the practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something unrelated to the practice, because thinking is what the mind does. So catching yourself being caught by a thought where you like suddenly are like taken off by the story. It's when you catch yourself, you have to first catch yourself. The instruction is to come back to the breath, but it should also be don't judge yourself. And by doing that part of the practice, the learning non-judgment of yourself, you become less judgmental everywhere in your life. Because those kinds of things that we all share, and even to this day, for me, just like you, I'll be sitting and I'll say, "You're not doing this right. It's not today's not. Why isn't this like yesterday?" My son keeps calling me. I'm sorry. And that is simply our attachment to what we thought was a good experience or doing it the right way. And that stands in the way of the next time you're sitting of doing it the right way. Because the right way is not having a preconceived idea that you're attached to and that you're expecting to have. It's letting go. Something negative may pop up, Marina, as we know that. I mean, a sad thought. You might think of a friend that's dying or that has died already, or a family member that's sick, or some crisis somewhere.
Right.
And so you're having a sad thing. So you want to be able to see that sad feeling and to experience it in full, but you don't want to get sucked into it. You want to be able to see it happening. It'll stay there as long as it needs to. You don't have to make it go away, and you don't have to try to keep it there because you want to learn more. Just in that practice, which is easier done when you're all alone, sitting down, whatever, in that practice where you begin to develop that non-judgment of yourself, and it just expands, non-judgment of others, slowly, so that, suddenly, down the road, wake up and they say, wow, I spent yesterday in that meeting.
Mhm.
I wasn't judging people like I used to do it. I disagreed with them, but I wasn't trapped in it.
Engulfed, right, engulfed in the emotion. Yeah, I have these moments where I feel truly connected, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what it feels like, and it's wonderful. But I'm also a very ambitious, driven person, and the competition, the always trying to see where I fit in the scale of things. Like, it is something that I think my ego, and it's more of it was just ingrained in me, and maybe I was born with it, is to be the best at everything that I can be. And so even with meditation, I think I have to break this hold of, the ego saying, if you're going to do this, if you're going to take an hour, you you better make the most of it. And if I don't get there, I'm completely discouraged and hurt, and feel out of whack. It'll throw my day off, my week off. But I think I know in theory very well what you're saying, but
No,
I had
doing it,
absorbed
yeah, doing it is the hard thing. I agree with you.
it.
So
Yeah.
keep this simple thought in mind. The Buddha, after he gained enlightenment, went on to teach for 50 more years. And there
Mhm.
are hundreds of what they call sutras, his actual teaching. And in addition to that, there's all of these other enlightened beings over the course of the last several thousand years have written, the Abhidharma. And I mean, it's enormous.
Mhm.
And also there's all these other yogis and so on. And now the Americans who are testing in neuroscientists and everything.
Mhm.
But if you were to boil all of that down to like what is the essence and what is the simplicity of this practice, it's all designed to help us stop craving for anything, craving for something that is tastes great, craving for something that makes us feel great,
It
craving for
stimulates our senses.
anything. The
Mhm.
moment you notice craving of any kind,
Mhm.
that's where you need to step back and say, that's craving. I don't need to,
Mhm.
I don't need to move. I don't need to stop sitting. I don't need to, you know, do anything. I see the mind is craving. And that's what the Buddha said in the very first discourse he ever gave, the Four Noble Truths, is that the illness for all of mankind is craving. It's just wanting either to hang on to the
Mhm.
beautiful things or wanting to push away the uncomfortable things. It's all just one little thing, craving.
Mhm.
So
So
sometimes
have,
you just go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say, have you seen the research as recent as 5 years of how meditation impacts somebody's body and mind and immune system? I mean, have you
I've seen,
read that?
I've read and seen a lot of that. And for just for me, this is
Yeah.
I try not to get too um,
Analytical.
involved in that because it
Yeah.
just creates another level for me of
Mhm.
wanting. In other words, I want to have those tests done so they can verify this. And, like I want my immune system to do this or whatever.
But our brain wants to understand, I think. Our brain wants to understand before it can allow the experience to happen. Because I think part of us, the challenge of getting there, is that we can't logically understand or wrap our heads around the experience. Now, the idea is you shouldn't be thinking about this, but that's not human nature. Human nature is wanting to explain and wanting to understand what it means. And if I don't understand something logically, it's hard for me to allow it to happen. So this research for me has been incredible. It's had a lot of effect because I'm able to just say, wow, this actually does happen in 3D in reality.
So my my comment on that is that's good. And if it helps, if it no, because everybody's different.
Yeah.
That gives you, sort of the structure that at least on a cognitive sense makes you feel better about what you're doing. But again, the practice itself
Mhm.
is different than that because you could become attached to those things too, just like anything else.
Mhm.
So when you sit, starting out, just feel the body,
Mhm.
bring yourself more focused and feel the breath itself, just the breathing sensation. It's even helpful to say in, out, so that you're right there with the in breath and out. And then if any thought arises, like, oh, my brain is going into alpha one, whatever, just stay thinking because it's just a thought.
Mhm.
Let the thought come and let it go. If you have an emotion, let it come and go, and just boil it down to watch that little seed of craving that makes you want to hang on to a thought, makes us want to dive into some diatribe against someone who needs to hear the righteousness of our argument. Next thing you know, you've been arguing with your best friend for like 5 minutes and not even in the room. Okay,
Yeah.
I do that. We all do it. I mean, it just happens, and we all get trapped. But then you say, craving. Well, I want that person to hear this, so they got to hear this. It's just wanting.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that you're not going to call that person up and share your thoughts at some point, but you'll do it when you do it with less of an attachment of righteousness and
Mhm.
more of a sharing of why you disagree and being open, by the way, to
Mhm.
your mind being changed by
Mhm.
what they have to say. That's where I think the practice helps us in
Mhm.
our everyday life. So, going back to the Counsel Financial thing, in 2009, the entire world economy was turned on its head. At the epicenter of that meltdown was Citibank. And at the epicenter of Citibank's meltdown was the securitization division where our note was. One day, without any warning, they called us up and said, please be advised, your line of credit is being called in and it's no longer revolver. As you pay us, you can't take the money back out again. You can no longer lend more money to any client. We
Mhm.
called them and said, well, wait a minute, what about the clients who we signed a deal for 5 million and we've only given them 3? Can
Mhm.
we give them the 2? No. We're shutting you down. We're closing your line.
Mhm.
And a different set of human beings was brought in from their collection department, whoever they
Mhm.
were. The people that we knew moved to other banks. They quit Citibank. And we were like, are you kidding me?
Mhm.
So that was a big opportunity for me with my corporation crumbling, people clamoring for to be able to have their lines of credit, we having to tell good people, lawyers, hey, we can't advance you any more money. And by the way, you have to start paying us back. Very difficult period of time for us and for me personally.
Mhm.
The practice, as we've been talking about, was a great support for me. It allowed me, during when I sat in early in the mornings, to at least clear the slate for the next day and to have some semblance of rest and relief from the turmoil that I was going to meet the next day.
Mhm.
Fortunately for us, whether it was good karma or whatever you want to call it, Bank of America stepped up and in the midst of this meltdown, where banks weren't lending 10 cents to anybody,
Right.
they gave us $100 million.
Wow.
And that started Counsel Financial 2.
Okay, so when you say the practice helped you, do you mean it helped you in not, you know, being overcome with emotion and, you know, just sadness and frustration and
Anger.
or anger, or was it that and also the fact that you were calling upon something greater to intervene, like for a divine intervention,
Yeah.
right, to step in? So what, tell me how you do that in your practice, because I try to do that, like meaning
I can give you a simple. The second part of it is the answer is no. There's
okay.
no there's no other entity. There's nobody to call. That's the difficulty of the practices I've come to know it. You have to give up the idea that anything other than you have control of how you respond to life as it's coming at you.
But you believe in a higher source, in a higher intelligence.
I believe it's irrelevant. And when I'm at a point in my life, career, whatever it might be, to understand what that is, then it'll be relevant to me. But right now, what's relevant is what's happening in this moment, whether I'm filled with anger, frustration, fear for the future. That's all on me. And I can create my next moment, though. I can by how I relate to what's happening to me. If I react with more anger, hatred, and so on, well, then my next moment and mindset are going to be full of that. If I react with equanimity and engagement, but not letting it overtake me, then my next moment is going to be clearer or more in clarity and more able. So I don't think that anything I've experienced, and of course, as you know, there's more, requires the request of help from any other source or higher beings. The Buddha was asked this question, by the way. He was said, one of his students said, well, you say everything is cause and effect. Something that happened because something caused it, and on and on. He goes, well, what was the first cause? How did this all start? The Buddha's response was basically, that's irrelevant to you and me. What's irrelevant now is you right now, where you are, being aware of your circumstances, knowing where your body is, and watching and so on. That's what's relevant. What would you do with the knowledge that I mean, how would you even understand if there was a God? And I'm not saying there isn't or is or isn't. I don't think he was saying that either. He was just saying it's not relevant, and we distract ourselves when we try to have someone or something else intervene, when we're the only ones who can really, sort of control what happens next. So I didn't, and my deepest experience of that, and one of the biggest tests for me of where my practice was at, happened in 2005. I had been on vacation with my wife and my two children in Italy for 2 weeks. We came back, and during the 2 weeks, I never got to a gym. I never got to work out, and that's, of course, a big part of my life. So I went down in the basement where I have a little gym, and I was just going to do some light working out. And I was doing that, and all of a sudden, my head just exploded. I mean, there's no other way to describe what happened. It exploded from the inside. It felt like it exploded inside out. It was shearing pain. I fell off the bench. I felt nauseous. I couldn't barely see. I mean, it was I've been treated for 30 years for migraines, but nothing like this. Somehow it was a Sunday, so I didn't know. I mean, I was confused and disoriented. So my wife and my son got me into bed. I took as much Advil as I could and just sort of passed out for 2 or 3 hours. When I woke up, I was woozy, which is typical of it being after a migraine. You feel a little woozy for a while.
Right.
But I was modestly okay, but still something was wrong with my body. But again, I thought it was just this 2 week hiatus in my little working out. The next morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm at the office and boom, another headache just like that. I'm at my desk and fortunately a retired Supreme Court judge was working for me as they were talking to me. What's the matter? I said, I don't know. So he took me to Millard Fillmore Hospital and they asked me, like, I said, oh, I have migraines. Nancy Nielsen's my doctor. And, oh, you've been treated for migraines? I said, I've been in and out of the emergency room twice a year for 30 years. Okay. So they shoot you, they hydrate you, and they give you an intravenous, some sort of pain medication or whatever. And in 20 minutes, you're like, beautiful. The judge says to the doctor, I think that he needs a CAT scan. So the doctor says, Judge, it's not protocol for a migraine headache. He says he's having migraines. He said, but we don't give CAT scans for that. The judge said, he needs one, and if you want me to call somebody to get this done, I'll do that, which he did. The doctor comes walking over. I guess we're giving you a CAT scan, Joe. Mm-hmm. And by then I was starting to feel okay, because the drugs were working. And my wife showed up, and my cousin, my brother had all come to the hospital. And the doctor said, Joe, you had what we call a thunderclap headache. It's not a migraine, it's a thunderclap headache. And we understand those are much different, and the experience can be horrible. So he goes, so 20 minutes later, he comes back. He says, Joe, well, here's your problem. You've got a large tumor on the right side of your brain. We're all like, Jogger, what do you mean? He goes, yes, look at, he says he has the film. He said, look at, you can see this big white spot. That's the tumor. He said, but that's not your real problem. You see how at the bottom here it spirals? That's spiraling into the base of your skull. And that's why you had the thunderclap headache, because the moment you started to exercise, your veins swelled just even the tiniest bit, and now there wasn't enough room, and boom, your head exploded.
Wow.
We said, wow, we couldn't believe it. He says, you need to see a neurosurgeon. I said, okay. Tomorrow when I'm in the office, I'll make some calls. We'll get to. He says, no, you need to see a neurosurgeon right now. What hospital do you want to go to? We're going to take you there in an ambulance.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
You're not leaving this gurney. I said, what are you talking about? I feel okay. That's because the drugs were given you. But you're not okay, and this tumor is a serious issue. You need to be in the hands of a neurosurgeon today. Well, okay then. So in the ambulance, I began to wonder what was going to happen and how I was going to respond to it.
Mm-hmm. And you've been practicing for how long at this point?
At that time, 30 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So
the ultimate test.
Right. So we see the neurosurgeon, and he tells us, we got to go in and we got to operate. There's no choice here. And we got to give you some relief from this tumor. He said, but we want to tell you, the area that we're fiddling around in, he goes, it controls your swallowing, your breathing, your vision, your hearing, all of which may be affected. Blindness.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm listening to this. And he said, I have to tell you, this carries more risk of death than your normal gallbladder operation or something.
Right.
Well, all right then. So we'll see if I'm up to the challenge for this.
Mhm.
And I stayed in the hospital. They didn't let me go home. And they wanted to give me catabolic steroids to shrink
Mhm.
the brain and the tumor more
Mhm.
before they went in. And so during this time, I had, for the first time in my life, dealing with my own mortality. Like, wow, this could really happen. This could be the end of life as I'm experiencing it. And I wondered, Joe, what you're going to do at that last moment when you know, the night before, the morning of your surgery. Are you going to just stay in the moment, watching your anxiety and your fears and your love for your family and your wife, or are you going to fall back on that Catholic 9 years of Catholic school upbringing that you had, going to church 6 days a week and confession and all the sacraments, and say an Our Father and a Hail Mary just to hedge your bets? Is that what you're going to do, Joe? You're going to hedge your bets on God's going to take care of you and you're going to go to heaven, or he's going to help the surgeon get you out of this thing. And I didn't know. I did, because the moment had not arisen yet, the last moment. And I was like, this is really fascinating. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. There was
Mhm.
a part of me that said, well, what's the harm in a little prayer, and asking for help? And there was another part of me that said, Joe, this is the test of
Wow.
being in the moment and of your practice and all the things that you've come to believe. Well, the good news is, for me at least, I stayed in the moment. I didn't have the least inclination to do anything other than just watch and observe myself and what was happening. They rolled me into the operating room. And of course, the next thing I knew, I opened my eyes and my surgeon is leaning over the bed. And I heroically say to him, I'm ready. He goes, you ready for what? I'm ready for the surgery. He goes, you're in recovery.
Wow.
I said, what? He said, yeah, the surgery took 5 hours, Joe, but you're here. You're in recovery. So I immediately go like this, my fingers, my toes. I said, okay. It was a funny moment. I said, and you have to see the humor in it. It wasn't crazy, but he laughed, and I'm like, oh my God, it's over with already. Um,
Wow.
yeah. So they only left me with one thing. They took out enough of the tumor to give me the space so that I was, at that moment at least, if this tumor didn't ever grow again, at least wasn't going to go any further down the base of my skull.
Mhm.
Then I had to go to 5 weeks of um, radiation.
Okay. Yeah.
I did it 5 days a week. Um, that was to either stop the growth of the tumor or what they say, kill it, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And fortunately, that worked. Then I began experiencing this pain in the side of my face. It was, on the one hand, it was all numb. On the other hand, you couldn't flick your hair across my cheek that wouldn't cause me to like jump in pain.
Wow.
It's still like that. And that is called, no, I didn't know it at the time. I've come to know it very well. Trigeminal neuralgia. The trigeminal nerve comes up your neck into your face and branches into three branches, covering your forehead, side of your face, on here. Okay, that trigeminal on both sides. Well, the tumor is pinching my trigeminal nerve. It's sitting on it now, and as a result, 24/7, I'm in like a constant sensation of discomfort, burning, pain. And then periodically throughout the day, I'll get these like shooting pains in my eye and my cheek, like someone sticking a needle right into your eyeball. It's the weirdest thing. And
Mhm.
fortunately, it's not like it stays there. It's like a zoom,
Mhm.
you know. And so, I mean, from time to time, people see me like I'll be sitting just here and I'll go like this, because it like it's such a shock.
Mhm.
I still have it. It's become a friend. We get along together in the same body. You know, I have to make space for it, uh,
Wow.
and it's not going away because I consulted two different neurosurgeons who suggested that this surgery that now needs to be done to get the tumor out is that they take off the whole side of my head, including my ear. This is from two different doctors, not just one. Okay, there's a surgery like this. They take it off and they work on removing the tumor. Now they can see the whole thing.
Wow.
It's a 2 day surgery. I'm in there all day one day and all day the next day, and overnight they put something on it to cover me up. I'm out all the time. Both times, you know, I'm happy to live with this thing. I'm not doing that. I said, what about my hearing? What's left of it? Oh, they said, well, you won't have your hearing. You know, once we take your ear off, well, we're going to put the ear back on. But you just won't be able to hear out of it. It'll be ornamental. I said, okay,
No.
let me think about it.
Wow.
Actually, the first time I went to Johns Hopkins, Perry Weiss and my partner, Chris Diamandis, went with me.
Mhm.
We went into this doctor's office like 7 o'clock on a wintry night, dark. And these two Asian American doctors came out and met us. I thought we were going to talk about radiation.
Yeah.
For some reason, they had the understanding that they wanted to do this surgery that I just explained to you. And we'd never heard of anything like that at the time. So we sit down, we've been waiting for Joe to, and they take a skull, hold it, you know, like one of those you usually see in a courtroom, a skull. We're going to take the side of your head off like that, okay? We'll put it over there. We didn't say a word because we were like dumbfounded, the three of us. We get back in the car and I say to Perry and Chris, I said, well, that wasn't very much fun, was it? It broke the ice and we could smile about it, but craziest thing you ever.
So that wasn't the only time, though, that you faced mortality, right? Because then your wife was diagnosed with cancer.
Back in 2013, I came home from a business trip and she said she had a little stomach ache. She said, feel my tummy, it's hard. And it was. I said, okay, let's see what happens. You know, she didn't want to eat anything. The next day, she had started getting rashes and was scratching herself. And the third day, she turned jaundice. So we went right to the doctors. They said, well, sounds like it could be gallbladder or something. You have gallstone. They did, I'm sorry. So then they send us to a doctor to have a scope done. They just go in, scope out the gallbladder, look for gallstones, and maybe they can even nip one out if they see it.
Mhm.
Well, this 20-minute procedure took 3 hours. I'm in the waiting room.
Mhm.
They actually closed the waiting room and went home for their Saturday and left me there by myself in the dark,
Mhm.
waiting for the. Finally, the doctor comes. Little Indian guy, nice person. Joe, he says. Sorry it took so long. He said, but I scoped, you know, and I looked at the gallbladder and it's healthy. He goes, and I didn't see any gallstones there, but there is something blocking the duct that goes near the pancreas. Something's pushing on it. He said, so I thought maybe a gallstone got loose, got in there. She said, so I've been scratching at it and poking at it. He says, you know, I've been doing this for 30 years. He says, I don't think it's a gallstone. I said, okay. Like, I didn't know where he was going with this. I said, so what do you think it is? He says, you have to talk to your doctor. I said, you are a doctor. I mean, you're the one who just did this. Can't you just tell me what you think? He said, I think there's something. pushing on the duct. I put a stent in and opened it. Your wife's going to feel great in about an hour or two because all the bile that was building up, causing her to look jaundiced and feel hard. It's all going to start clearing out. The stent will do it. He said, but I don't know what was caused. I said, are you saying she has something on her pancreas, like a tumor? I think this is why you should talk to your doctor. So we get back to Marsha's room and we're just waiting around trying to figure out what this is going to be, but we weren't crazy. And this doctor he's not our doctor, he was just sort of a
Hospital doctor.
yeah, that was was specialist in gallbladders. He calls in around 7 p.m. to her room, on my cell phone, and says the same thing that this guy says. I said, well, what does that mean? Can you give me a diagnosis? He goes, no, you need to talk to, who was seeing this? Oh, I can't help you, he says. You have to go to Roswell. Now, Roswell is Roswell Cancer Institute. Yeah, so we both go, that's your diagnosis? We have to go to Roswell?
Mm-hmm.
So we had a lot of friends at Roswell, and so they knew us there. So I said, we'll go there. We went there and spent all day. They did their own MRIs and the whole battery of tests. And they marched us into a room. By the way, Marsha's feeling great. She keeps saying, Joe, we should go. I'm going to stay here for you. I feel good. I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
At least hear what they have to say. And they come in, they have their team of doctors, 3 of them are in there and so on. And they tell us the same story again about there's something blocking. I said, okay, look, we really need to tell us what you think. We think your wife has a tumor on her pancreas. We think she has pancreatic cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was shocking. But they said, don't worry, because if it's just this one tumor and that's all that we see, then there's a surgery we can do to remove it, and people can have success with that.
Mm-hmm.
After all this talk, this went on for like an hour, and she's holding my hand and squeezing my hand. I could tell she was like petrified. I was too. He said, I just want to tell you one thing. It means nothing, but we saw a little shadow on her liver, but we don't think it's anything. It's just a shadow. It happens a lot of times. But before we do the surgery to remove the tumor, we're going to biopsy that little shadow to make sure it's not cancerous. I said, well, what if it is cancerous? Oh, well, then she has something more significant. We would shut, no surgery. I said, I'm going to get a second opinion. Please do. No doctor wants to be the only one saying these things. So we went to New York to Mount Sinai, saw a very good doctor, great doctor. And they do the same thing, all the tests, bring us in a room at the end. It was a Friday. And he says, I think just that one tumor, that's all we see. Same thing, the surgery, it could be successful. But we had still that shadow, but I don't think it's anything. But my main radiologist, my main guy, is coming back from his vacation tomorrow morning, Saturday morning. I'm going to have him read it over the weekend. I said, well, we're supposed to go to Florida Sunday with the family, for a week. He said, go on vacation. When you come back, you'll come down here. We'll prep Marsha for surgery. We'll do the surgery, and she's going to be fine, Joe. Mm-hmm. So we go to Florida. Monday afternoon, I get a phone call. Joe DiNardo? I go, yes, this is Dr., I forget his name now, from Mount Sinai. Oh, yes, Doctor, how are you? He said, we were wondering, you said, I think we need to bring your wife in again for another biopsy. I said, another biopsy? You just told us to go on vacation with the family and we can do the surgery next week. I said, is this because your radiologist looked at the film? Well, he did come back. He did look at it. I said, well, what did he say about this little shadow that everybody's talking about? But he thinks it's a little more. It could be a problem. We need to see your wife. When? Tomorrow. So we got there, and they meet us and they tell us, we think it's problematic. We want to have it biopsied now rather than open her up,
Mm-hmm.
biopsy during the surgery.
Right.
And we have a woman here who is just skilled in doing it. And she is. They did it. They bring us in. It's tumorous. It's cancerous. I said, well, what does that do to the diagnosis? He goes, well, it changes it from stage 1 to stage 4. Stage 4. Well, of course, by then I'd read up a lot about
Yeah.
cancer, and this was not a diagnosis that anybody wants to hear.
Right.
And so Marcia turned white, and we just went back to the hotel because there was not going to be any surgery. He said, Joe, they can treat you at Roswell just as well as we can treat you here, and at least you'll be home, your wife will be home.
Mm-hmm.
And so her first chemotherapy, her doctor came by, a beautiful, beautiful Indian woman who has since become a close friend of the whole family. And I walked out with her after, Marsh was in the 5 hours of getting chemo in the hall. I said, I know that you don't like to give too detailed anything else, but what am I looking at here? I need to know what to do with the family and friends, and I don't know what to do. She said, well, I think you should think about this being 6 months. If she makes it 12, that would be a lot. I said, okay. She said, this is the best advice I ever got. She said, Joe, the only thing your wife has is her hope. Don't destroy that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your job to go in there and tell her what I'm saying. If she asks, I will tell her. If she asks you, then you know you should tell her. But if she doesn't, don't tell her.
Mm-hmm.
She knows herself. That was great advice, because it's not, as a caretaker, it's not our jobs to do what we think the sick person needs. It's our job to listen to what they think they need and to comfort them as best we can, especially in these circumstances. So for the second time in a short period of time, I was confronted with this sense of mortality, hers, not mine. And all the fears of, like, my daughter is, as you know, because I know you know her, intellectually disabled. So she's very naive and immature, and doesn't get the gravitas of things as easily as other people her age would. But what am I going to do with her and then her family? They have a close Italian family. With them, I don't know. But mostly it was like, am I going to really lose this person? And she made it 2 years. 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, they were like shocked. The hospital couldn't believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, but nothing worked. They would say, oh, the scan looks clear. And 2 weeks later, they'd call us in again after another scan and say, I think we got to have to do another round of an experimental drug this time. Because the tumors kept coming back more and more. And then she started to get really, really sick. But we had one more trip that we had long since planned for Florida with the whole family. And she insisted that she go. She wasn't well. She was almost looking like a skeleton at the time. But we got her there. And one night, the hospice nurse in Florida that I hired came to hook her up to feed her. They fed her with a tube.
Mm-hmm.
But she had complained that she was getting sick and nauseous just from that whenever they would give it to her. So the nurse and I were chit-chatting next to Marsha's bed. And all of a sudden, Marsha starts to vomit. I catch it in a little bucket I had. And the nurse said, "Let me see that." She said, "Yo, this is blood. These are blood clots she's spitting up. You need to get her to a hospital." And Marsha whispers, "Not here," meaning not in Florida. So I get a private plane for the next day and to fly to get us all out of there, get her home and into hospice at our house, but with hospice. But after the nurse left that night, Marsha, who was just laying in bed like this all the time, conscious, she sat up, just her and I in the room, and she turned to me and she said, "Do you think that I'm going to make it and that I'm going to get well?" I said, "We always said we wouldn't lie to each other." She said, "I know." I said, "I don't think you're going to get better. I don't." And she just looked out the window and said, "Oh." She laid back down again. We took her home the next morning. It was like probably a Wednesday. And she died on like Friday night. And I'm okay with all of this, but it's still painful, as you can tell. I can't tell the story without the emotions affecting me. But during that 2 years, uh, my practice of sitting regularly every day increased and intensified. And it helped me. I'm not going to say it like made everything okay, because everything wasn't okay. But it really gave me a perspective and an opportunity for a moment throughout the day to just be in the moment. And then all those hours of chemotherapy, I just sat there with her.
Yeah.
She couldn't talk, couldn't do anything. It would just be her and I in the room. So I would just sit and be with her.
Mm-hmm.
I worked very hard on opening to just be with her in everything that she was experiencing and trying to listen for any clues that she wanted or needed me to do something, tell somebody something, tell somebody they couldn't come and visit her, whatever it might be. And it was a very rich, deeply emotional 2 years that from which I learned a great deal about myself, about other people, about death, about our thinking about death. And it made me better in my financial practice because I was able to listen carefully to what lawyers who borrowed money from us if they were struggling, what they were struggling with, and what the personal reasons were. I felt very comfortable saying, "Well, is there more to this? I mean, what's going on at home? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
why is it you're so pressed to do these?" And it was very helpful to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not a good banker.
Would you say that the fear of death is no longer there, or is it there, but you cope with it differently?
I don't fear death anymore. I've seen it face to face now for myself and with my wife. I will tell you this, that being with somebody and holding them
Mm-hmm.
at the very moment that they transition out is a life-changing, powerful experience. And people that work with dying people will tell you that it always is. It's such a mystery, a deep mystery. I don't care about what everyone else says happens after death. Nobody knows
No.
for sure. It's such, so there's a couple ways to look at that. You could look at it with the greatest fear and trepidation. And I think we all do that most of the time. But you can also look at it as like the next adventure.
The sense of curiosity, right? What's next?
As I sat there with my wife, I just said to myself, what happened? She was just here.
Mm-hmm.
And she wasn't here. It was just a breath. They said how it would sound. They said when you hear a gurgle, like they call it the death rattle, you know, and they said exactly what was going to happen to her physically.
Mm-hmm.
Be there for it. And to say, oh, she just wasn't there. Her mother and brothers were in the room. I asked them to please leave me alone now. I stayed in the bedroom with my wife. She had just passed away. Her face was still glorious and beautiful. And I just started talking to her. I couldn't believe it. I said, please come back. You can do this. You can't. But she was gone. It was very powerful, very different. But as a result, I'm not afraid of it. I don't feel afraid of it. I mean, I began that feeling when I went through the brain surgery experience with myself. I began, but that process continued. And they'll tell you in meditation practice that it is a skillful practice to contemplate death.
Well, you have to learn how to die before you die,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. You have to learn how to, you have to live how to live properly, but you have to learn how to die. Okay. But it's a good practice to think about me dying. What happens to my daughter? What happens to my house? What happens to this and to that? And how will people feel? And can I see all my friends coming to my wake? And all those things. There's deep emotions. You're going to feel it. I think if you reflect on this, you're going to feel all those feelings. But that's good. It's a cleaning process. At least I feel it is. And in the Buddhist tradition, they tell you death is always with us. It's on your shoulder. It's just around the corner. We have no idea the time of death. When you're born, you sign a contract. If I want to be born, I'm going to have to die. That's the deal, right? But they never tell you when. That's up in the air.
Yeah.
And you don't know when. You just don't know when. I mean, your husband leaves to go to work one day, and all of a sudden you get a phone call. He's been in a horrific car accident. What? What do you mean? It just happened.
We see that a lot in our line of business, right? And it's never the same, obviously, as when you're personally experiencing something versus you hear about it. But I have always been scared of death, and it's been on my mind as early as I can remember. Death has always scared me, and I've never had explanations that made sense or that I could use to justify or not have the fear. But it's something that I work towards, is to overcome fear of death, because if tragedy does happen, I want to be able to ground myself and anchor myself in the present moment, as you say, and learn to observe and learn from the pain and the strong, overwhelming emotions that come with that, because those are life lessons as well.
Right.
What an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that with me on this podcast. It means a lot. I know that you wrote a book you dedicated to your wife, a letter to my wife. I have the book and read the book more than once. And I was crying just like I was listening to you say the story again. But to have that love with another human being, to having experienced that, I think that is a blessing. That is, not everybody gets the love that way and appreciate it, and appreciate the spouse and do
Yes,
all the things that you did. I mean, you know,
funny. It's funny you say that because a lot of people who heard me read the letter to my wife at her funeral later
mhm,
asked me, "Could I have a copy? Could I have a copy?" That's when I decided to just put it together in a
yeah,
book form that you have, the memoir.
yeah,
Um,
mhm.
so, so many of my male friends have said, "Jesus, Joe, my wife keeps saying to me, can't you love me like you love Martha?" I mean, like, so, I mean, we did have a bit of a storybook
Yeah.
long love affair, and we had a lot of fun together. Uh,
Was Marcia spiritual? Were you, the two of you, spiritually engaging in the time that you were married together? Was she encouraging you on your path of spirituality and vice versa? Or
so yes, she was encouraging me to follow my path because that meant me being away at retreats for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks at a time.
yeah,
Um, so she was very supportive of that, and she said, "Joe, I love you more when you come back. You're so you're so soft and warm and
yeah,
loving." For at least a couple of weeks after you return from retreats. So go ahead and do it. Uh, and she was not a meditator, and I wouldn't call her a Buddhist either. She would say, she says, "Joe, I'm more intuitive,
mm.
and things come to me through my intuition and
Well, women have that skill, have that
yeah,
power. It
yeah.
is made out.
I would say after being with her for a
Mhm,
while, I saw, wow, she came to the same exact place
mhm.
I'm at from a different.
From a different angle, for sure.
Yeah. And
For
so I
sure.
was very respectful of that. And when she would say to me, "Don't do business with this person
Mm,
who might have had dinner with, nicest person in the world, maybe I would think," just she would say, "It didn't feel right, Joe. You'd be making a mistake to do it." And a
mm.
few times I went and did it anyways. She was right. I began to learn to listen to
I
that.
do that for my husband
Yeah.
all the
And
time.
I had to, it was like it humbled me. I said, "Okay, I,
Yeah,
I'm happy to hear what you had to say, and I'm going to follow your
your advice.
your
Yeah.
advice on this stuff."
So we've been chatting for over 2 hours, and it feels like 5 seconds. I guess just to wrap it up, do you have advice? How can stillness and mindfulness help people in the legal profession? What is your message?
Okay, well, first of all, I am in the legal profession, so whatever I've said so far is some support for that idea. But I wrote a second book, because people ask me
That's
that
right.
same
That's
question.
right. Yes.
The second book is called Mindfulness is for Everyone. Um, and the more and more I talk to lawyers who are under great stress, whether they have one off practices, individual cases, or mass torts, it
Mhm,
doesn't matter. Stress is stress.
mhm,
And burnout, as we all know, happens and is happening to everybody.
mhm.
So when you're under great stress for long periods of time, the burnout physically and mentally is going to happen and is happening.
Yeah.
I firmly hope that all of those people, especially in the legal profession where I spent my life,
Yeah.
would take advantage of what mindfulness can provide them by way of giving them an opportunity to relax that mind muscle,
Mhm.
take a clearer look at what they're doing and how they're doing it. Are they being skillful? Are they being greedy? Are they treating their clients and other and opposing counsel, you
Yeah.
know,
Mhm.
ethically and respectfully and so on? I
Mhm.
think that lawyers as in general would benefit from that. And there are a number, by the way, of lawyers who are very have great mindfulness practice. Lisa Blue, I know, has been at Spirit Rock Meditation Center out in California. California itself, the Bar Association, has a group called Warrior One, and they go on retreats down into Mexico once or twice a year for a week at a time. They have a once a week wake up call on Thursday mornings, a short meditation or short Dharma talk, and then meditation for 10 or 15 minutes. There's a group like that in Florida called the Mindful Lawyer. So it's going around, and I've been asked by, Mike Papantonio and Sharon Booth, as sort of runs Mass Torts.
Yeah.
If you consider, offering mindfulness, at Mass Torts Made Perfect or somewhere. I'm not sure doing it in Vegas is a good idea.
I think that's why it should happen.
No.
Vegas.
It's really needed there, but I'm just not sure people come to Vegas with that mindset.
Right.
And plus, they're not going to get up early in the morning. It's for 7 a.m., meditation with Joe DiNardo.
For sure, yeah.
Until 2 in the morning, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that it's going to take root at some point in time, because the whole idea of mindfulness, first, it's secular, it's not religious, and it enhances anyone's religious practice. If you're Catholic or Protestant and you want to pray, it doesn't hurt, I should say, to have the ability to focus your attention and make the prayer your object of attention. And of course, in Buddhism, there's a big push on compassion, loving kindness. It's not spoken of so much in the media, but mindfulness and compassion are just as important in Buddhism as the growth of wisdom and insight.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even one, or it's both together. And that can be very helpful. More and more people in the world. It has nothing to do with what religion you're in. You could be Hindu,
Right.
you could be.
That's why I love it. That's why I love it so much.
Right.
It's irrelevant, And even if you have no religion, this doesn't mean you have a new religion. It just means you're anchoring yourself to find what matters to you and how to evolve your personal growth to manage life a little better. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for being on my podcast. I am so excited to go back and watch this again.
Me too. Great day. And my daughter and my son have both been calling me, so I can find out what emergencies they have.
Thank you so much, Joe. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.